Well, there's a lot of things in there, actually. I think the first thing is certainly some people are calling for the end of the government, but they're also calling for other things. They're also calling for an improvement in their supplies of food, an improvement in their daily life. And all of these protests which are taking place, which, by the way, Biden got it wrong. They are not new. They are not on a scale that has never been seen. Protests has been going on for the last 30 years or so, ever since the economic crisis of the early 90s. So nothing new except in the scale and, I should say, also the publicity given to the protests. So we know more about them now, and that's because of social media, and that's because of media attention generally. But what's happening often is that the protests are mixing things up, just as they are indeed here in Britain. When there are anti-vaccination protests, there are a variety of people of different points of view coming together to mix the protests up, and that's also happening in Cuba. So some of them are saying, we want democracy, we want a change in the system. Others are simply saying we want food. And in that sense, Reed Lindsay is actually quite right, I think, when he talked about the scale of the impact of the embargo, which under Trump became more fierce than it has ever been since the 1960s. It's very difficult to know quite what he can do, because I think Reed Lindsay had it right, that the combination of the impact of COVID on the economy with the collapse of tourism, which is the mainstay of the Cuban economy now and has been for 3 decades, coupled with the tightening under Trump and the fact that Biden has not eased the embargo at all, those two factors play a huge part in the shortages. Under Trump, it became extremely difficult for Cuba to get access to hard currency, and that has increased. And without the hard currency, they cannot get the oil. Without hard currency, they cannot get vaccinations. They're developing their own vaccinations and have been doing so successfully. And they are already well into the process of vaccinating the population, but they could not break into the system, the world system, for distributing vaccines. So they had real problems with that. So Reed Lindsay had it right, I think. No one can quite predict that, but since protests have happened before and have dissipated, then we can perhaps say, let's not expect this one to actually finally work. And that's largely because the protests may run into hundreds, may run into thousands, but they do not, I think, and many people agree, reflect the attitude of the vast majority of the people. The vast majority are frustrated economically, but the protests, the counter-protests, are not without support, because what Cubans fear alongside the economic problems, what they fear is also disunity in the country, knowing that they are under threat from the United States. The embargo is essentially a threat. And so I don't see them necessarily supporting any demands to end the system. I think end the shortages, but they recognize equally that the United States is largely responsible for the collapse in the economy even before COVID happened.
Espera, que hay plenty of cups right here. Sí, hay un montón de, a bunch of cups right here. Pero,